Welcome to the Beresford Booth Weekly webinar. Today's webinar is Understanding Trust 101. What is a trust? My name is Linda Naish, and I'm here with McKenna Hoffard. We are attorneys in the probate estate planning group here at Beresford Booth.
Yeah. So this week, we're going to be kicking off the very first webinar in our four-part series, Trust 101. This week, we're covering what is a trust? What does that even mean? How does a trust function? All of those questions will get answered. So this week's what is a trust? The upcoming months will be, do I need a trust? The considerations you have to take in for whether or not a trust is a good fit for you, or if it's something should just be skipped. Part 3 will be, how do trusts work? How do they actually function on the nitty-gritty in the more detail? And then part 4, I have a trust, now what? What do I do with it? And the upkeep involved in maintaining a trust. So we'll cover all of that in the next 4 months.
But first we have to talk about what is a trust, the legal definition, so to speak. As you can see, there are a lot of different kinds of trusts. Most of you have probably heard of a revocable trust, a living trust, perhaps even a family trust. As you can see, there's lots of different types of trusts. They all have different purposes. They all take effect at different times. And honestly, there are about as many different kinds of trusts as there are situations and people. And you can pretty much name a trust anything that you want, but the terms of the trust and the people running the trust are really what make the difference. So we're going to try and define some of those roles and terms for you today.
Yep. So, and yeah, I think to Linda's point, just to clarify or restate here, a lot of these trusts, they all do different things, but some of them do the same things just under different names. So supplemental needs trust, special needs trust, same concept, different names. So you might have an attorney talking to you about a special needs trust and a different attorney talking about supplemental needs, and it's actually the same thing. Similarly, a firm might call it a testamentary trust, and another firm will call it a marital or descendants trust. And it's still kind of the same thing. That can get really confusing. So we're going to standardize our terms, just so we're calling it the same thing and hopefully minimizing confusion as we wade through this. So we're going to start with definitions. So the IRS definition of what a trust is a trust is a relationship in which one person holds title to property, subject to an obligation to keep or use the property for the benefit of another, right? Similarly, Black's Law Dictionary defines it as an equitable or beneficial right or title to land or other property held for the beneficiary by another person in whom resides the legal title or ownership, recognized and enforced by courts of chancery. Now, if that sounds like legalese,
it is. This is where you usually lose people. So let's try to break down the 4 or 5 basic terms that you're going to find within a trust.
Yeah. So the terms we've decided to go with for purposes of this web series and what we typically use our forms is the trustee, right? Trustee is the person that's holding the legal title to whatever the trust property is, whether that's land or funds or interest in a business, what have you. The trustee's holding that interest and they're given it from the trustor. We also can be called the grantor or settlor. That's the person who is creating the trust and giving the property to the trustee to hold.
Okay. Trustee is also the person that makes distributions. They have other duties, but the most important aspect is the trustee is the person who holds title, but not in their name as the trustee.
Yeah.
The next important part of any trust and what every trust has to have is a beneficiary. That's the person for whom the trust was created. A beneficiary can be an individual, a group of individuals, an entity, or an organization. They can be specifically identified, or it can be a group of people. A beneficiary of a trust could be all of my grandchildren, or all of my children. And so as long as they are identified, then you have a beneficiary, and that who benefits from the trust. Principal, when used in this term here, means basically the assets of the trust, what property is being held in the trust. It can be real estate, cash, investment, cars, just about any type of asset. It can be an interest, it can be a copyright interest, it can be an LLC or corporation. It's pretty broad. Now, just about any type of asset can be held in a trust. There are a few assets that aren't normally held in a trust, for example, a retirement account. That's outside the scope of this discussion. Really what makes up a principal of most trusts is going to be cash, real property, investments, or tangible property like cars. Sometimes you'll see principal referred to as the trust estate or the corpus. Again, these are all the same, mean the same thing. Some trusts will use one word, some will use the other. And then lastly, the trust agreement is just basically the written document that outlines the purpose of the trust. Normally, trusts are in writing. There are trusts that can be created verbally, orally. That's way outside the scope of this. But for the purpose of this discussion, a trust agreement will just be the document that identifies all of the people above, what is going to be held in the trust, and how distributions are going to be made, and when, if ever, that trust terminates.
All right, so now that we've got our definitions and terms that we're using, here is the definition that we created for how we typically describe a trust to clients. A trust agreement is a legal agreement whereby the owner of property gives the property to a trusted individual for a specific purpose to benefit a person, organization, entity, or animal. Now that's still really vague because we're trying to capture the concept of trust outside of applying it to a specific scenario, because you can have trusts where the trustee who's holding it is actually holding it for their own benefits, right? So husband could give money to wife in trust and wife is trustee. Why would you do that? We'll explain that later. But you can get into scenarios like that. So it doesn't always have to be different individuals. We did create an example to kind of highlight how trusts can work, to hopefully make it a little less vague and a little more concrete. So Linda?
So in our example here, Bob wants to give some property to his 7-year-old son, Al, not AI, by the way, that's Al. Al can't own any property because he's a child, he's under the age of 18. So Bob decides to give the assets to Carol, his sister, and says, hold these, use them, invest them for Al's benefit. And Bob says, here's how I want you to distribute the assets that you're going to hold for my son's benefit. Here's what you can distribute when, here's the standards that you're going to abide by. And so if we fill in the terms from our prior screen, you can see that in this situation, Bob is the trustor. He created this trust.
Yep. And then of course, Al is the beneficiary who's having the property used for his benefit, but he doesn't own it and he doesn't have the authority to manage it. That authority belongs to Carol, the trustee, who has other duties.
Right. And so as the trustee, Carol takes title to the property, whether it's a house or an investment account, and she manages the property on behalf of and in the best interest of Al, who is the beneficiary. Carol also has other duties to determine when distributions should be made according to the terms of the trust. She also has to file tax returns. She needs to keep Al or his parent advised of how the trust is being managed. And there may be certain levels of distribution that the trust agreement that Bob has created that she might have to follow. For example, Bob may say, keep this in trust for Al's life, and at the end of his life, distribute it in a different way. But it could also be that he has said, when Al turns 25, distribute everything.
Yeah.
And so that's an example of a trust. There's another example that could be a testamentary trust.
So, you wanna go to the next slide? So
Okay.
that example of Bob, Al, Carol, just in coming up with that, we sat down and we went, well, what, this scenario, it's pretty basic. What types of trust could that be? And that could be a setup for a revocable trust, or also known as a living trust. Could be a testamentary trust, which just means it's in Bob's will, right? His will could say, if he dies, all his stuff gets held for Al, unless Al's, under the age of 18, it's held in trust. He's over the age of 18, over the age of 25, whatever. Or it could be placed into an irrevocable trust, which just means that Bob can't take that money back. It's held in trust. Carol's in charge of it. It belongs to Al, but in trust, right? But Bob can't go take it back in any sense. Could be an education trust or a special needs trust. So as you can see, even just that simple example here of, there's the 3 players, it's just some money, there's nothing complicated about it. Even that you could find in, 5 to 6 different trusts here of any single one of those scenarios. There's all these different factors that play into it. So trust agreements can be kind of complicated. They definitely have a lot of uses and are very functional, but it takes a lot of detail and know-how and wading through the terminology.
And what we're going to talk about in the next few weeks beyond these basic terminologies is when would you use any of these trusts? How would you decide if this is what you need? And before you decide, do I need a trust? Should it be a revocable trust? Should I set it up under my will? You also want to talk about how is that trust going to be administered? Many people create trusts and then they don't know what to do with them afterwards. That's one of the topics we're going to talk about in one of our other webinars. But basically, you want to understand that one, there's a set of terms that are going to be found in every single trust: the trustee, the trustor, the creator, the beneficiary, what makes up the trust, the principal or the corpus, and then the trust agreement, which gives you the terms. Those basics you need to understand before you can even move on to get to those other types of questions. And so the next time we're going to have a seminar on do I need a trust, where we'll go into a little bit more detail of trying to decide, do I need a trust and what type of trust might I need?
Perfect.
Yeah.
So, if you have any questions or want to talk more about setting up a trust, here's our information. Go ahead and give us a call, and we hope to see you next month for the next part of our series.
Yes. Thanks again.